So this is a very different panel from the one before, and because the theme of the Utsavam today is allyship and women, we are very fortunate to have 4 very successful women: Katharina Görgen from the Goethe-Institut, and Janaka Pushpanathan from the British Council, Patricia Théry-Hart from Alliance Française, and Rathi Jafer from Inko Center. Now, all 4 of these women are in positions of leadership in these institutions, and very much cross-cultural institutions where they have to be sensitive to the customs of the different countries and the people they're working with. And they may be in Madras today, but they may be in Indonesia or Africa tomorrow. And that's a big challenge for all of them. So I want to ask you some very generic questions, but what do you feel are the qualities which you have brought to your institution and to your leadership, and particularly as women? Is there something special of being a woman?
Okay, I'll start. I don't know if there is anything special as a woman, but I think 2 qualities I think are very important. The first one is curiosity. I think you have to be very curious no matter what. You have to be curious about other people's culture. You have to be curious about different type of practices. So I think for me, curiosity is one of them. And the second one would be resilience. You have to endure a lot of differences, and you have to overcome some problems sometimes as a woman. So I think, I would say curiosity for me and resilience.
I agree with Patricia. I think curiosity and resilience are 2 great qualities. Also, I think post-pandemic, I mean, if we are allowed to say post-pandemic, I think one of the things that not just for women, but I think for everyone who's either working in an organization or leading an organization, I think agility has become one of the most important qualities that to be able to sort of, and I think it kind of, there's a little bit of a match between curiosity and agility, because if you can't be agile if you are not curious. But I also feel that as women, I mean, sometimes we do get stereotyped into, women are more empathetic. But I think empathy is a quality that everybody, whether you're working in an organization or whether you're leading an organization, I think it's really good to have a sense of empathy. And I feel Shreya and I were talking earlier, and she was mentioning that maybe it's more natural for women to feel empathetic. But I feel that I've had really good, colleagues who are men who are empathetic as well. So for me, I think empathy, agility would be really good characteristics to have. I also feel in terms of one of the big qualities that makes women and men successful in any leadership role, perhaps, is also the ability to listen. I think that perhaps is a really key quality to have, because most of us go into our roles. I mean, I'm sure we all come into our roles with some preconceived notions, biases, etc. But I think the ability to listen and the ability to learn, I think, are also really good qualities to have. And I think I've done that fairly well, hopefully. Yeah.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I do agree with all of what has been said, and especially about listening, I think, and about being nimble to change and to understand what is possible within a certain given context. But in the overall context of allyship, which I think is a very important one, how do we, within our own spheres, also look out and support the ecosystem? What's happening there? And I'm not going too much into the gender role of it, whether you do this better as a woman or better as a man, because I think we've moved on in some ways in terms of sometimes finding a lot of comfort in working and strength in working in an agendered context. I think a lot happens when you don't get gender. I'm not saying it never comes up. It does, and there are issues that one needs to be aware of. But you're not particularly good at what you're doing because you're a woman or because you're a man. You may bring something to the table, something extra to the table. And I was, I'm always struck by these various reels and things that come, whether uninvited into your phone. So one of the things I saw on Women's Day, we were just too much of it happening. But there was a good one from Indra Nui who said, your career type and your career position is always in conflict with your role as a woman. So whether as a mother, whether as a daughter, whether as a sister, whether as a wife, etc., etc. And often it's when your career is peaking that you're running behind children, you're managing the home, you're doing all of these things. And this is expected of you in certain cultures. I'm sure Debbie has that question later down in the line, so I won't get into this now. So being supportive, being nimble, being a good listener, I think, being realistic with how far, because a lot of what we are doing is, bordering on the edge of madness. You have, passion and madness and often no budget. And you're wondering how you're going to be doing this. So being realistic in terms of what you can do and then pulling it off with the help of co-opting support.
I actually thought about it on the way, and I thought about my batch of other directors, and men and female, and I don't think we are that different. I think we all like to make decisions, we do share certain qualities that are completely gender-free in terms of leadership, but I think what makes it interesting in intercultural contexts is there's the other. So while I might be fine saying it's not a gender issue, or me being a female leader is not a problem, that also needs to be true for the other side. And I think this is also something that we need to look at. All of our leadership ideas need to be reflected in the teams and countries and contexts we work in. So great goals in the beginning might be changed along the way, realizing that both sides actually need to be comfortable with what our idea of leadership might be.
I'm sure that many of you have met many challenges and problems over the way, and you found solutions to them, but maybe retrospectively you thought, gee, I could have done this differently. Can you talk about what you learn from when you have these kind of problems and you have to move forward with them? Or have you all been so successful you haven't? You've managed everything.
For me, I think the most obvious answer is time. I have a tendency to take quick decisions because I also feel that in our working days we have to. And as much as you say you want to listen to everyone and you want to come to a common decision, you often feel pressured to be faster than that process allows you. So you kind of go one way and later you think, okay, had I had a bit more time, had I spoken to that and that person, it might have been a more inclusive process. So basically lots of things where I look back and I'm like, yes, that would be one, not regret, but one learning, more time.
I think, and I can give you an example from I've been an entrepreneur before I joined the British Council. So from my entrepreneurship journey, I remember the first lesson in entrepreneurship that my investor told me at that point in time, say that, it's okay to fail, but fail fast. So I think it sounds very, of course, yeah, a couple of us had a good laugh, but I think in reality, because when you do work for you're running DakshinaChitra. It is not a startup anymore, but when you started it, I think you would have to think like a startup, right? So I feel that even for multicultural organizations like ours, like Katharina was saying that, there's probably, paucity of time for us to be able to build consensus. But I think that's also the sort of one of the codes of leadership, if you will, to be more inclusive, to be able to do that. We won't get it right all the time, but I think most of the time we try to get it right. And I think, like Rathi was saying, we've all learned not to work on our own. I think in the past, maybe 15, 20 years ago, there would be like a UK program or a German program or a French program. But I feel now the lines are blurring, and there is possibility and opportunity for us to come together because, and just working with partner organizations. I mean, we worked with Shreya's organization to be able to organize the Concert for Friendship during the season that the British Council had. So I think, and with KM and stuff like that. So I feel allyship is also about knowing what you can do very well, and then sort of saying that, okay, I can bring this to the table, but I can't do everything myself, but, getting other people onto the board as well. So I think that's a learning for us from the British Council. And also, when you're an entrepreneur, you can't do anything on your own, just on your own. So I feel allowing people in, letting people in, and building that trust to be able to share that space and to also see a little bit of space, I think that's one of the big lessons for us, I think.
I think for me would be to set boundaries. I think as a woman, setting boundaries, sometimes it's difficult. We are taught to be the good girl. We always say yes. And we always want to be, to show that we're the best, that, we're going to make it. And so setting boundaries can be very difficult, saying no. I remember the first time I said no to my president, it was like 15, 20 years ago, was a big step for me, saying no. Because saying no meant I didn't know how to say no. I had to learn how to say no, basically, because I was taking on more job and more job and more job, and I was working 70 hours, and and it was a lot. And then eventually, this lady said, well, just say no. And I said, but if I say no, I'm going to be fired, or they're going to think I cannot do it. And she said, can you do it? And I said, yeah, of course I can do it. And she said, but you don't have to do it. And I'm like, well, I kind of have to do it. And it's like, no. And I said, well, what kind of excuse am I going to give? And she said, just say that you don't know how to do it. And I said, but I know how to do it. And she said, yeah, but that's your ego. Just say no. So, we were at the meeting, with some type of committee meeting. And my president said, oh, by the way, just do it. And I said, oh, I cannot do it. And he said, why? And I said, well, I don't know how to do it. And I said, like, really, I was like, and then, nothing happened. He talked to another person and he said, do it. That was the first time I said no. So for me, setting boundaries is very important because, again, as women, we do a lot of things. We work, we have families, maybe we have some type of interest. Anyway, we're very, very busy all the time, and get to a moment where if you don't set your boundaries, first you don't take care of yourself, and then you cannot take care of everything else. So for me, that would be the best trait I would think of.
I think working as we are with cross-cultural teams and across cultures in terms of communication styles. So having worked with the British Council many, many years, where you could quite often speak in half sentences and it would be understood and it would be taken across, and things like, sarcasm and irony and humor and everything works. Working in the Korean context is completely different in the sense of the manner in which you communicate and you are understood or sometimes misunderstood. There's a big gap there in terms of, especially when you are between speaking and writing and putting things down, etc. So along with the first point of how do you be a good listener, I think it's also how do you learn to communicate within the context in which you work. So, and this happens both with internal stakeholders as well as external. And if you're having multiple stakeholders, then all the more. So, how do you respectfully do that? But if you are finally the decision maker and the buck stops at your table, how do you then, taking on those points of saying, don't keep it too late to pull the plug when it's like really a mess, but don't do it so quickly that you haven't taken on other opinions as well. So I think it's very important, and that's a balancing act throughout. So fortunately, there haven't been any kind of big drops or failures or anything like that. But occasionally we've had to pull the plug on something because it was just not going to work. It was clear to you from the start, but you wanted to be inclusive, you wanted to have the discussion and bring everybody around the table to understand that it may not work this way, but there's probably another way to look at it and do it. So I think it's constant communication, but keeping your context and your stakeholder interests in mind, that you bring it all to the table in the most inclusive, compassionate sort of way.
How do you develop trust when you have all these different constituencies and people, and as Rathi said, from different cultures and different levels of society also? How do you develop that feeling of trust in getting people online with you to actually come forward and work with you? I think the Alliance Française has done a very good job on that, actually.
Thank you. I think maybe I think leading maybe by example would be one of them. I think it's important to, when you ask from your team, anything, you should do it yourself, or you should educate them or support them. You should try to understand them too, because of course, there are intercultural differences. So, but I think really leading by example and, showing that failing too is okay, nothing happens, and I think you can start building, trust on that. And after a while, the team understands that, everything is okay, that we all work towards the same goal, that we all want to achieve, the same mission, which I always say, at Alliance Française, and I think for all of them is the same, is to share another culture, which is wonderful. I mean, what best? So, yeah, for me that would be really leading by example and just, supporting them, educating them, making them to understand that we all are the same. And one more thing, I first was trained in the US, and there, they teach you that, it's not about being the boss or not the boss, it's the team. So
the German answer is very boring. It's being predictable to a certain point, because I know we all kind of glorify those like genius bosses who wake up in the morning and they have this concept that they want immediately done and they don't explain and they don't ask, but we kind of admire it as kind of like entrepreneur genius. And for me, nothing is more horrible than someone coming to your office and they can't tell which way it's going to go. Because every single time you might be in a good mood, you might be kind of inclined towards this project, or you might not, and there's no like line in what you're doing. So yeah, predictability is not so sexy, no? But I think actually kind of following a strategy and also explaining that strategy so that the next time people come with a project or an offer, you can say, this is what we've spoken about, and they can also kind of develop together with you because they understand where you're coming from.
Thanks, Katharina. I think, and I've worked with Rathi in the British Council 18 years ago, and it's lovely to be back in this role now. And I think we do three things very well. In the last year, we've managed to work with 11 state governments in India. We've influenced and reached 30.5 million people in India individually. We've partnered with 1,527 organizations across India, and we've given about 940,000 pounds worth of scholarship, about 2 million worth of grants to education, and I think about 2,500 UK alumni in India have been upskilled. So, there must be something that we're doing right in order to be building.
Wow, that's a lot.
Building this trust. But I think, put very simply, I think, and I'm going to sort of I mean, it may be a sort of, website textbook answer to the question, Debbie, but I think the British Council values of being bold and optimistic, although sometimes we are unable to be that because we are also very risk-averse when it comes to, certain kinds of decisions. But I think we try and embody and reflect that. We also have, when we say we have equality, diversity, and inclusion, underpinning or underlying framing all of our work, we tend to take that very seriously, and we do have a lot of not just training, but also, sort of like you were saying, Patricia, by leading by example and role modeling that. So I think we try our best to do that very well every day when we go to, whether we are at work or whether we are meeting with internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. And one of the other things is, I think, this whole sort of having a culture of equity within the organization, be it our buildings, be it our sort of facilities, be it the events that we organize or we partner with. I think that kind of builds from the very start sort of a feeling of inclusiveness, a feeling of trust and belonging, right? So everybody who works with us or works for us, I think that kind of feeling permeates through everything that we do. So we try to get it right most of the time. Sometimes we haven't. But I also feel that our partners have invested a lot of trust in us, and I think it also takes a lot of effort from our organization to be able to invest the same kind of trust in our partners. So I think building that from ground up has not been easy, but I think we're in a really good place, and hopefully we'll continue to do well, and hopefully we'll find more partners, and hopefully the next panel you'll also use British Council as an example and not just the Alliance.
I want to go to the question that Debbie raised about trust. And I think that is the glue that keeps us all together and keeps us all working. And predictability is in no way unsexy. I think predictability goes with it hand in hand, whether you're talking about personal relationships or stakeholder relationships, to the extent that they want to work with you because you walk the talk. If you have said that you would do something, you will do it, and you expect the same from your partners as well. Again, going back to the example of working with the UK and working with Korea, I think in the UK you can get potential partners, excited with an idea. In Korea you have to get them excited with the outcome, which the outcome doesn't come right at the beginning, but you've got to tell them why you've budgeted 3 pens instead of 2 pencils. You'll have to make sure that it goes down, grilled down to that. And in many ways, I think very much like the Germans, no room for once you've agreed to it, you can't deviate and say, oh, but I forgot about that, I'll do this as well. It doesn't happen, and it's a good lesson to learn right from the beginning. So I think trust is about you sort of saying what you will do and then doing it. And just making sure that happens. And it's not something to be taken for granted. It has to be very carefully nurtured and sustained. It's not the one time. All of you know, because you work with partners, and whether they are donors or whether they are giving you space or whether they are ideating with you or delivering program, whatever it may be, you have to walk the talk. And you have to, again, if you're not able to for some reason, tell them early that you are not getting out of something and putting the whole project in a tiz because you woke up late and sort of, then told them that. So I think these are all the pitfalls we need to be aware of. But the fact that trust ultimately comes down to honesty, as you were saying, it comes down to being able to respect another point of view. It is about reaching out and providing that ecosystem, being a team player. All of these things become extraordinarily important, and I think the numbers will add up. The stats will speak for itself as you go along, provided you stay consistent. You've got to just stay consistent. And doesn't this happen with any personal relationship, whether you're talking about husbands and wives or boyfriends and girlfriends or girlfriends and girlfriends and whatever else, etc., down the road. But it just means that the other person knows you've got their back. And likewise. So that is something I think which is a very rudimentary thing, but it's a very important edifice on which we build everything else.
Right. I think we're getting very good comments from everyone. Do you see your jobs as incentivizing young artists and young people, helping them to come up? Is that part of the work that you do?
I think the one thing is mentorship, right? I think the one thing that we are trying now, at least over the last 5 or 6 years, we've had it very informally, like I remember we had job shadowing and work shadowing and stuff like that, but then I think now we're looking at sort of solid mentorship programs for our own colleagues within the organization, because with mentorship also comes learning a new skill, being visible, because otherwise the leadership team gets all the visibility, but what about the rest of our colleagues who are actually beavering away at their desks doing? So I think that is one key aspect, whether it's, our organizations or any corporate. I think in multinational companies, it's more a formal structure of mentorship, but now we've started doing that very consciously within the British Council. We have like a 6-month-long mentorship program, so there are mentors, and then you obviously have mentees as well, and then we put in an application, and then sort of mentors and mentees are matched, and it's pretty. The first year I think it did really well. So this year we have almost 500 colleagues across the globe who are either mentors or mentees. So I think that's one really, incentives usually, when you talk about incentives, you think it could be monetary incentives, but I feel these kinds of incentives also go a long way, because it then prepares you for your next big job, either within the British Council or outside as well. So I think for people who work with us, this is one thing that we have done quite successfully in the last few years. In terms of artists, I think we've sort of moved away from these big showcases which we used to bring down from the UK. Obviously, our grant is shrinking like everybody else in the room as well. So for us, I think we've started investing a lot into capacity building. We've started investing into artists. So for example, during the season of culture, which was India's celebration of India's 75th year of independence, we ran specific grants which provided almost 120 artists from India and the UK, and huge collaboration between 14,000 other sort of subsectors of artists to collaborate. So I think those are things that we're doing. As we speak, I know that there are the international collaboration grants which have been announced for the arts. So in terms of grants, I think we've got our processes in place. The one thing that we could do better probably is we work with a lot of governments across India. I think somewhere if we are able to because I feel just the British Council or Goethe, for instance, or Inko or Alliance, to be able to do it on its own is very difficult. So we feel that if there is a collaborative, funding pot that is available, governments do put in money in terms of in-kind sponsorship and stuff like that, but I think we could get better at that, because then it'll also help us leverage our grants for artists. Some states seem to do it really well. In fact, one of our reports which we released called Taking the Temperature, which we partnered with FICCI as well as with Artex company, showed that during the pandemic, Kerala was perhaps the one state that sort of, I think Kerala, Tamil Nadu, some states did really well in terms of supporting artists and artist communities, but that's an area that, at the British Council we are thinking about very seriously, hopefully, in incentivizing both monetarily as well as also providing opportunities for collaboration.
I should ask you, have you had mentors which you feel have really helped you to grow?
Short, quick answer, yes. I think I've had a mentor in my first startup, which allowed me to break away from the first one and co-found my second startup, which was very, very successful. So I got an exit of about 5x, which is very good in the startup sort of, we could have done better, but I was happy with that. And then in the British Council, I'm currently undergoing a mentorship program. I'm being mentored by the Deputy CEO of the British Council, which is fantastic. And I think it's a great opportunity. Even if it doesn't get you the next big job, I think it widens your perspective. It also allows allows you to see things completely differently, because sometimes we're all sort of buried in with what we do and so focused on sort of organization goals, outcomes and what we have to achieve, but we also sometimes forget how to look at it very differently. So I think it's helped me a lot. Yeah, thank you.
This is a horrible answer. I've met great people and inspiring people, but for me it also works the other way around. I've had lots of bosses where I was like, never ever do I want to turn out like this. Write it down. And so you kind of come up with a list of things that you totally want to avoid once you are in the position. And I think mentorship is great, but I think also colleagues are important, because we tend to look at like different hierarchies, but I also think everyone needs someone to bounce off ideas with, to just. And I have a round of 4 colleagues who are in similar positions around the world, and we just randomly chat. Sometimes it's about a problem, sometimes it's not, but you kind of have this, someone has your back, because maybe you don't want to share it with someone in the institution. And this, unfortunately, I think we haven't institutionalized enough as an idea. It's kind of on your own initiative that you need to find someone with whom you want to share problems or success or whichever it might be in between. But I think this is something, because when we speak about allyship, to be able to support someone else, you also need to be sure of your own position, and you need to be sure that you can actually follow through no matter what. So I do think you need internal support for that as well.
It's an interesting question, because as Katharina says, it's not so much about having a mentor, but learning from others who in spheres that you're not familiar with, maybe. So at the British Council, yes, we did have an external mentor whom I approached because I just wanted to understand outside my immediate sphere of work, what are the other things that one can come to bear upon and do better. Within Inko, an Inko Center is quite different from the British Council or the Goethe or the Alliance Française, in the sense that it's completely corporate support for the arts, and we work in that independent space where we work across to the consulates and the embassies, but we're not defined by their agenda and certainly not their budget, and therefore not constrained to work within what in a year a country may decide or an embassy might have to take note of or whatever. It's an interesting space because there, and it's a small team as well. So how do we learn from outside the organization as well? So I'll give you just one example. We had a person, very senior person, unfortunately passed away, who came in early on to talk about something called 5S, which is used in manufacturing, which is basically about how you source and you scope, you keep it in shape, you bring it into operation so that anything that you want, especially retrieval of information, what took you hours and hours to do, you can do it within a second. And of course it's applied differently in manufacturing, but when you come to the cultural sphere and the area of work we do, it was very much about distilling those ideas and then applying it to our thing. So he came in and did a couple of workshops with us, and even to this day we implement all of that in terms of how recovery processes are very quick, disposal processes of something that you might red tag and say you don't need is very fast. And there is a way in which you keep inventory, and this includes inventory of ideas and program. So different, and how we have adapted it. So that was one example of an external source coming to talk about a context within which we work, and how do we then apply it. But I think learning like this from people at all levels, and I agree with Katharina that we should not have that hierarchy there. You are often mentoring your own colleagues, but you're also, I wouldn't say being mentored by them, but that you're also receptive to those ideas which come in from the other side. At the same time, you're looking for outsiders also who can come to bear. It could be a talk, it could be a workshop, it could be best practices with other organizations are doing. I mean, we have a group called Culture Conversations, and we try to meet and kind of talk about what each one of us is doing, with the idea of saying, hey, that idea is very similar to what I have. Maybe I can talk to you about I was just talking to Janaka just now, before we came in here, saying there's something coming up which might have a British director in a program which has Korean and Indian and other artists come. So is there some way we can maybe tap into the grant system? Is there some way in which we could provide space? Is there some way we can co-present? Is there, there are many, many different ways in which you do it. So I think it's a continuous process and always looking for who could bring that special something which you might not have thought of, or it's there and it needs sharpening. So how can it be done? So I think it's an ongoing thing for us.
I'm very much like Katharina. I never had a mentor, but very early on I learned that networking was very important. And because I'm very curious, I network. I explore different type of avenues. I met different type of people. I met artists. I met, of course, students and teachers. But I met experts. I met CEOs. I belong to many groups, women group too. So it allows to open up to new perspectives. It allows to think about, like you were saying, maybe at least for Alliance, to have different type of workshops, different type of conversation, different type of ideas. I think, and that's very personal for me, once you go past the networking phase, of course, and you go into the partnership or allyship, for me it's based also on affinity. It's important to work with people you can trust. It's important to work with people who have the same values as you do. It's important to work with people that, have the same vision. It doesn't mean we work the same. For instance, Katharina and I, we work together on different projects. Well, German and French were very different, let me tell you. And we laugh because sometimes we're very at the opposite of the spectrum. I mean, it's like, and still it works because we trust each other. We know we want to do the same thing. We have a vision, we have a project, we're going to do it, and somehow it falls into place, but it's based on trust. So for me, it's first network, it's being curious, it's networking, is learning. Learning is very important. I think, you have to learn your whole life. You have to, I think the society is going so fast nowadays that if you stop learning, you're left on the side of the road very, very fast. And I think all of us, we have very young public, or at least we would like to have, younger target groups. And we cannot be organizing, conversation or shows that, have no interest for younger crowds. So we really have to, keep pace with the world. We have to, be in those relationships, keep meeting people, and then try to work together on the project. And I think most of us, we do that.
So one of the questions that Shreya wanted to know was, how can you collaborate to make Madras a more robust cultural platform for India? I know you've spoken and said, okay, we work on these projects, we understand each other, but is there anything that you could do to take it forward more?
I think it's quite a challenge, honestly. We all have the intention to work together, but I think in terms of the way planning is done, strategic planning as well as allocation of budgets, I know this is the boring bit, but it's there. It's the reality just faces us all the time. I think we do need to have more conversations. We need to have more discussions early on about what's coming up or likely to come up, and understand quickly whether there is any partnership opportunity over there. And I think respect the fact that some of it is easily done. Like you might say, okay, you want to get a set of films together and put it together and have a screening and have a discussion. Far easier to do than if you were going to do a new production, you're going to have your residencies, you're going to put these things up. Not that that's impossible, but I'm saying I don't think we're having enough of those conversations. We're so immersed in our own work that often that doesn't come up well in advance, because when you're into the year, then it's quite difficult to suddenly pull up shore up something. So these culture conversations, one angle of it is also to do that. Is there something that we can bring up early enough that we might be able to pick up and see through, to its end, to its logical end?
You each have your own identities, and you have your own audiences also. And of course, you'd like to keep those identities distinct. I think the Goethe-Institut was able to collaborate with many organizations on water when they worked on a major theme which was important for all of you. And I guess it's working, finding these themes and finding them early enough so that 2 years down the line, if you're going to do this, we could all plan some programs for it.
It's interesting, Debbie, you say this. See, the thing is, one of the big, we've not found a solution to this challenge. So, for example, North India, Delhi and perhaps I think East India have something called the UNIC cluster, which actually has a budget, and we are able to put budget into that because it's the cluster. They have some amazing programs. I've been sort of asking for more information around how we can do that together, and I believe we can't. and why we, okay. But one of the things is, the British Council led on 2 of the G20 conversations under India's presidency. One was education, the other was culture. So I represented the UK government for education. And one of the things that the G7s kept talking about again and again and again is, but we should be able to do this together. But like Rathi says, maybe the culture conversations is a good starting point, and we should probably look at 1 or 2 things, low-hanging fruit, to demonstrate that we can do something together. It's easier said than done, but I feel that if we can at least do one thing in a year together, then that could then probably motivate us to, like you're saying, having conversations, 2 years before, what is the big program going to be? So, for example, life is easier at the British Council now because we've got 15 global programs, and that's everything has to fit into that. So sharing that information, I think, with other multicultural organizations, and saying that, this is what we're doing, and also to understand from each other what each of us can bring to the table, and then maybe having a conversation. So hopefully the next time you invite us to an Utsavam, we'd probably have done one good thing together.
But I also think we often underestimate how much communication it takes, because we all have different annual calendars. We, to a certain degree, have different global goals that we are supposed to work on. They're not completely different, of course. Climate is easy to do, but there's also, the water project was hugely successful and it was a great thing. But at some point, the question is, what can art now contribute anymore after those initial steps? Helmut really, I think now all that's left to be done is build the construction it's like, I'm not going to do that. That's way beyond my expertise. And in terms of bringing people together, in terms of art contribution, I think he's kind of done it. So what I find is also an aspect, because, it's the 4 of us, but we are here to react to the local context. So, and then this is something we haven't spoken about as much, because technically all of us are interwoven in a network that works sometimes parallelly, sometimes together, sometimes completely contradictory goals here, and bringing all of this together in terms of saying, let's do this one thing, that is going to take an immense amount of planning, communication, that only has the outcome that at the end we might have a topic. And that might not be great either. No? That might be the smallest common denominator. So I think this is just something that, if you say, why don't you work on it? There are so many details behind it and so much time that goes into it, that I think this would be the project already. saying finding it, that's the main thing for the next 2 years.
Yeah, and not forgetting that quite a lot of us, I mean, for all of us in fact, also contribute to, as you say, within the context of India, there are various festivals and there are various things happening where it would be interesting to bring a German or a British or a French or a multicultural or a Korean into the mix. So we're doing that as well. And there are several people within the city who have partnered us on those various initiatives. But then in the past, we've had Fête de la Musique, which all of us, Adam is here in the room, so we have collaborated to say we will provide you the space, or an artist is coming through, so we will link this in. So this is really not cost an arm and a leg. And it hasn't meant too much, it has meant conversations of how to pull the whole thing together. I remember that we had Anil Srinivasan was part of that conversation. There was an educational workshop angle to it. There were things happening at the British Council, at the Alliance, etc., etc. But then it didn't move further because it was not just about venue. It was also about the kind of content you were bringing into it. And I think it died a natural death because after at some point there was nobody who was taking ownership of the program to really take it forward. So I'm saying there are smaller things that I think we could do, but again, it means a lot of intense conversations to understand how we can do it over and above your full program that you have individually as an organization.
I just wanted to give a quick example. Katharina, I won't say, I mean, we talk to each other about every other day, more or less, okay? To celebrate Women's Day, we both have the same idea, so we didn't talk about it. So we both offered a workshop on Kalari Payat. Was it Kalari Payat? Yeah, martial art for women. And you know, I don't know how it happened. Either she looked at my program or I looked at her program and I said, gosh, we're offering the same thing. So basically, we switched our workshop the afternoon so that the two workshops would not be at the same time. But, you know, even though we talk to each other, even though there's communication, in terms of agenda or calendar, sometimes it's not so easy.
So again, culture conversations is about not cutting into your audiences, about sharing dates, not having too many events at the same time, so that and also about sharing to our databases. We can't give you our database because of privacy issues, but we can say, look, this is happening, interesting thing happening at the Alliance, go there. You know, so that's the supportive ecosystem that we were talking about earlier, where we say it's very important for us, there's only so many people who on a Sunday afternoon would be here listening to the likes of us to, you know, talk about, no, I'm just saying it's very important because obviously you deeply care and these conversations take you somewhere or you contribute to it or do it. But the fact remains that in every city, there's only that critical mass which is going to places, and we try to extend that and get more people into it. So I think sharing dates is very, very important. And even as much as we try, sometimes, in that WhatsApp group, we'll be saying, oops, we have have we shared calendars? We've actually got this on the same day. It can't be helped. Sometimes it can't be helped.
Well, I think you're all doing a great job partnering with many organizations here, and you certainly do give a tenure to the city. I'd like to ask the audience, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask the participants?
I'd just like to say it's just not a question, but just an observation. I made it a point to come here to listen to all of you because I said I really want to learn. If there's anything I could learn, I have a small arts trust called Kalavahini. And my idea was if I could learn anything from all of you about what you say, because all of you are dealing with culture and dissemination of culture and audiences. And I found it very interesting. I'm sure there are lots of things which are going to trigger, just to know how to work with it. And how when you said, when you say trust, and you say you walk the talk, and you deliver what you need to do, right? And I think all of you were talking about that, the need to deliver. And I think from the artist's point of view, there's also the need to deliver. We go for a program, it's like we can't take the audience for granted, right? So we are going out there and pushing at 150% to deliver. But I think the question is, we think of trust. My bigger question is, how do we get audiences from an artist's point of view, to value that walk the talk. It's so difficult. It's not easy to create excellence or to sustain excellence or to be curious or to grow your organizations. But all of you are putting everything into it. How do we get audiences or people to value that excellence? It's a big question. I constantly ask myself in the world of performing arts. Constantly, because what does the artist do? We spend a lifetime in dance to create excellence. And no one's telling us to create that excellence, but we do it because we love it. We're passionate. But in your position also, to get people to value, because I think then it becomes that much more enriching. It's just an observation, but wonderful. Thank you all. I have lots of things buzzing.
Thank you. That's a lovely question, and I think a very valid one. As an organization, when I was talking about trust and walk the talk, I think it also includes this in terms of how we deliver our programs and how we approach our target audiences, in how we deliver what we say we will deliver. So you cannot take any one program for granted and say, next time I have a template, I know how I will do this. It's about 1, 2, 3 things operationally that I should do. So what you choose to do is that sphere of excellence that you hope to nurture. So who are the artists that you will pick? Would you take up something just because it is, serendipitous to do so, somebody's here, so you do it, but you may say no. Or you get an artist or you get a group who will say, I don't want to charge you an arm and a leg, I can come and perform. But then you don't relate to the aesthetic of the performance, or it's not what you normally deliver. So I think your audiences will build if you are telling them quite upfront what they are likely to get, and you deliver on that ground. So which means the onus is then on you every time to keep the bar up there and to exceed it, but never to fall short. So any audience will then pick your event and trudge through traffic to come there to say, the last time I went there, I had a fantastic experience. I'm sure it's going to be the same, if not better. It's a huge task. It's a huge task to be able to continue doing that. And I think every organization represented here has a certain way of doing it, has a certain language, a certain house style. So it's very important to maintain that as well, so that the audience also know that, quite often you would go to something and say, oh, I'm a little surprised, that was a bit different from whatever. But more or less, I think all organizations strive hard to keep that bar up there and deliver, and not just to be running on the same spot to say, okay, I did 40 events last year, I must do 50 this time. Not at all. So you might as well skip something and not do a tour if you've not found something worth it to bring out.
Malavika, I'd just like to say that I think we're in the age of media, and you look at all the advertisement that each one of these organizations do, and they talked about databases. I don't think it's anything that one can do alone. I think one has to look at publicity and what that brings for the audience, because that's basically how people bring in audiences.
And also
consistency.
Just consistency.
And consistency. Malavika Sarukai is consistent in everything she does.
Can I add something?
Yes, you can add.
Because I think we are all looking for excellence, but I think we also need to provide space and a network and an environment for experimentation. Because excellence takes years and years and years of a nourishing environment. And I think it's also partly our job to make sure that those first steps can be taken. And then we are very grateful if we are still there once excellence is reached. Because you also asked about the young artists. Because I think partly what we can offer is an institute experience and a space, basically. So I think we need to be there to give a platform, because that is how someone else can build a network. Because we might not be here anymore in a few years, but the network that they get to know in our institutions, that's not what I meant. will certainly still be here. So I think, especially for me, I mean, I don't want to answer for your institution, but it needs to cover kind of both ends, to cater to an art audience that appreciates and also recognizes, but it also needs to give space for everything in between.
I agree with that in terms of emerging artists and supporting but there as well, when you choose, there has to be a possibility of excellence, I think. There are lots of requests that come through which, not to put them down, but maybe quite mundane or doesn't really excite or doesn't get you anywhere, doesn't show you something. So that possibility of it, but having that platform, I completely agree, is very, very important. And there may be sort of mentorship happening with, senior artists coming in to talk or to see the work as it's in work in progress or whatever else. But there again, how do we work in a way in which we promote and we are quite strict about and provide all the kind of institutional support, but sort of then, for instance, we have students from Kriya who are doing, internships. They write and they blog and they put things together. So we get lots of applications, but there are only 4 or 5 that make the cut. So why? Because what they're saying is exciting enough. With a little nudge and a little support, they could go to the next level. So I think that's a critical decision that organizations need to take.
I just think one last thing. I think for me, it's word of mouth. Besides social media, I think word of mouth is very important, especially in Chennai. I think, people, they come to a show, they love it, they'll come for the next show. They come to the show, it's not as is expected. We may not see them again for a little while. So I'll give you just an example. We had Fête de la Musique last year, and it was a huge success. I mean, we had 5 bands, music bands, and we have about almost 1,000 young people coming. And they say, oh, we didn't know you had that at Alliance Française. And they say, well, do you have any more shows, And so we've seen some of them coming back. But it also depends on your target audience, because different type of show for different type of target audience. But I think word of mouth in Chennai, it's my experience, is important.
I don't know whether I should ask this question, but Katharina, you were talking about having bad bosses. How do you each navigate this kind of situation? I know I wasn't going to ask the question, but I think it's something that we all run up against at some point in our lives. No. How do you deal with a bad boss?
I think here we come back to the topic of the day. You find allies. I mean, that's like the only thing that's going to help. And in the end, I think leave. If it's a really bad boss, leave. Get another job. Yeah.
I think, all of us have had, not just bad bosses, right? I mean, colleagues as well. Sometimes it can be very difficult. Like somebody, I was at a college group discussion, and one of the young women in that college said, so what do you think about toxic positivity? So sometimes it is like that, right? It's everything is fantastic. You're hitting all the targets. You're doing very well, but still there's that, the environment is not very conducive, etc. I feel I don't know. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. Of course, if it gets really bad, leaving. But I don't think. Why should I leave? So I feel. Dealing with it, there are forums. Fortunately, in the British Council, we do have systems and stuff like that in place. We're very lucky, we're very fortunate. There is a sort of, there's a policy around this as well, right? So in British Council, we have policies for everything, so which is fantastic. But I think I've also worked in external organizations, and one way I've found a way to deal with something like this when you're not sort of agreeing or not just disagreement or dissent, but also there's this person who goes out of the way to make life very difficult for you and not very pleasant to work. I think sometimes having a direct conversation, it might not be very easy, especially if the person is way senior, then it becomes a little difficult. But I think also sometimes having a direct conversation, also sort of building a little bit of, I'm not saying groupism, but also building sort of friends from other departments who actually sort of, speak your cause, who have your back. Little bit like what Rathi said, building trust even amongst colleagues, right? So that it becomes very difficult for someone to sort of, bully, because it is bullying actually. Finally, it is bullying. So I feel being able to call it really early, call it really early, having the confidence and the gumption to say that I will call it. Yes, it sometimes becomes very, very difficult, and yes, you may feel that, okay, enough is enough, I've got a better job, I can leave. But I feel having the ability to be able to call it. And also I feel for many years we've been sort of talking about what women can do, as female leaders, lots of conversation around what a woman can do, what can you do to sort of, avoid the leaky pipeline. We can't avoid it. What can you do to get better pay? We can't do anything about it. I feel it's all about disrupting and dismantling the systemic barriers that do exist. I think it's up to the infrastructure. It's up to these people in high places to be able to do. It's up to the organizations, really. I mean, why should it be up to me as a woman to sort of say that, okay, I mean, why should the onus be on a woman to do it? I feel at some point we should break that stereotype and say that it's the organization that has to make policy decisions which are conducive for women to work and not sort of, get caught into the, of course, yes, women get pregnant, they deliver children, they have caregiving responsibilities, men do have them too. So men sometimes get a raise after having, like there's paternity leave, there's all of those facilities as well. So I feel a little bit of, we should cut ourselves some slack and not take it on ourselves to do all the changes. I think it's up to organizations to actually make it more conducive for women to excel in the workplace, and I think deal with bad bosses as well. So and sort of call it very early, I think, yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid in France the culture is not totally like that in the real life. So I would say, like Katharina, when you have a bad boss, the only option basically is to go. A structure is not always there to support you. So one thing you can do, of course, is to learn from this person and be aware that you might not want to do the same in the future. But otherwise, the option number one is to go.
In terms of bad bosses, it's not necessarily male bad bosses only. There's also the female variant. And I, on the one hand, agree with what Janaka says, that it's not about us, therefore, having to get up and leave, but it is also about finding a way of, in a professional manner, putting across what the problem is, the dissent is, and see whether, with a robust HR, whether it would work. And then try your best to have your point of view heard. But if that's not happening, then I suppose it's what Katharina and Patricia says, but not before trying that first. I think I've been fortunate not to have had this experience up until now. You never can tell, there may be a bend in the road somewhere. But that doesn't mean that there hasn't been moments of dissent and moments of you having to say things. But again, I have never felt that coming through on a personal front as being a woman and doing that. And for that, I think you have also got to articulate in a certain way that it's not coming across as you with any sort of gender-specific sort of framework attached to it. It's quite difficult because obviously you are who you are and that's what you say. But I think in any professional setup, there is a certain, if you'd like to call it a meta-language, there is a meta-language. There's a particular way in which you would put it across that you are not, for instance, even a simple thing like when you're disagreeing, raising the pitch of your voice to getting to a point where people won't listen to you. I've had this even with women colleagues where you sometimes just say, okay, fine, you're distressed. You want to just get out of the room and come back in, and then we'll have this even level conversation, we can do it. That is somehow stereotyped as the way in which a woman would react. You just, hyperventilate, and then you'd get into a situation where you're not heard. I've had male colleagues who hyperventilate also. That has happened. So I'm just saying that there is a certain perception, and that perception doesn't allow you to get to progress further. It is not happening. But it's not that it doesn't exist, mind you, it definitely exists. There are many people who will not take a straight order from a woman. When you say it, it's like always questioned, and why, and how, why not? No problem. Have those questions, have those discussions. At the end of the day, please do this. You've got to do something. It's got to finish. So it is there. It is 100% there. We face it all the time. I see it all the time in Korea. It's really interesting. In the arts sector, we've got lots of women as directors and on top. When you go into the corporate world, there is definitely that ceiling, and there's only up to a point that they are there. There are all these discussions. It's one of the most strident feminist societies you can face. There are groups who are out in the street Saturday afternoon so that they don't, stop working. Afternoon, they would get out in their lunch break and they'll be protesting something there, But there is definitely that glass ceiling. We see this in India and many places as well. There, beyond a point, how is the boardroom represented? How many women get there on the top to have their say? Now it's a rule in India, which is, I think, a very progressive rule, that they say you must have at least 30%, 33% represented there. So,
but I also think part of the truth is, in Germany, you say people can always agree complaining about the weather, complaining about the train system, and complaining about the boss. And hating your boss is also kind of part of the game. I mean, it's very comfortable to be like, no, that's her or his problem, she or him decided, not my thing. I'm just leaning backwards, looking him or her fail, and I can blame everything on this leadership figure that in the end has nothing to do with me. And that's completely independent of men, female, whatever. So I do think ultimately it also needs less hierarchies, because as long as you have this figure on top on whom you can blame, but then who's also going to get all the glory once it works out. I mean, all of this is part of the problem. So solidarity, allyship, less hierarchies. I think all of this would help.
Yeah, I was just going to say that about hierarchy, because often I think all of this is suppressed, and one fine day it sort of bursts and comes through and you're surprised. My God, you've been doing this all along. How come now suddenly this is happening? So to be able at the first instance to say and to negotiate and to agree or disagree or whatever. Hierarchy, I think, plays a huge, huge role. And sometimes it's so easy to pass the buck to say, this is not my job. This is someone up there who has to do it. So unless you feel you're a team and unless you feel invested in, so the man from the gate who receives your customer walking in is part of your team. And that's the impression they will get when they walk in. From the beginning, if you're being very rude over there, why would you want to come back? So somewhere that feeling of team player, investing in it, solidarity, as you say, and this ability to say, yes, decision making has to have that hierarchy at the end of it, but it's been a very inclusive process.
Well, you've all been wonderful panelists, and I think you've given a lot of good ideas. I think we've come beyond being female. We're just leaders. Teamwork is very important, and you talked about the importance of listening, of curiosity, of agility, of looking at the entire environment around you, that as a leader you have to set boundaries, you have to be able to say no, and you have to be able to reflect on discussions, but not take too much time. Okay? And communication is very important. Lots of times things don't happen because it's miscommunication. And if you're predictable, then you're trustworthy and you can have your partnerships. And I'm sure I've left out many of the things you've said, but it's been a very interesting panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie, for moderating it and for being a leader yourself. and setting up this space. And actually, the one thing that connects all of them is DakshinaChitra, because all of them collaborate with DakshinaChitra, whether they collaborate with each other or not, in terms of syncing calendars and budgets and goals. I think that's one big platform is DakshinaChitra, and having a space like this to do a lot of different things in having a museum that is has a very keen eye with curation. So I'm going to quickly ask Kausalya Aunty to please come and honor this very powerful female panel that we have. We've planted trees in your name. We want to be eco-friendly with our gifting. Dr. Patricia Hart. Dr. Rathi Jafer. I had lovely introductions prepared for all of you. Janaka, Pushpanathan.